It's the Hero Show. Welcome to the Hero Show, everybody. Starring the irrepressible Andrew Bernstein and the relentless in support of liberty, Robert Begley. I am Andrew Bernstein. You are indubitably Robert Begley. How you doing this afternoon, Robert?
I am doing great, Andy. Happy to be here to talk about liberty, conceived in liberty, the man who used that expression in one of the most famous speeches in all of world history, Abraham Lincoln.
A real giant in American history. Right? He is a
Yes.
giant. Not
Yeah.
just because he was like 6'4" and a powerful dude, a wrestler and a rail splitter and everything, but moral.
Yes.
He was a moral giant. Honest Abe.
Moral giant.
Yep.
Honest Abe.
Uh,
Yes,
was
exactly.
a lawyer.
When
Got his
when we were kids,
reputation of being an honest lawyer.
yeah,
How
as a
rare is that?
lawyer. Yep.
Yeah,
I
right.
know.
Right.
But remember, Andy, when we were kids, we had off February 12th, Lincoln's birthday. They didn't merge all these good and bad presidents together into one holiday. It was like February 22nd, George Washington, February 12th, Abraham Lincoln.
Right. Right. And that's the way it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Two
Yes.
holidays, not one. And for the real, probably the two
Giants.
greatest presidents. Yeah, definitely two giants, and probably the two
I
greatest
would say
presidents in
so.
American history.
And if you ask me on the spot, I would say Washington and Lincoln, one and 2. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Me too. Washington number one because without him, the country would never have been founded, and Lincoln as a
That's right.
close second because without him, the country may well have been split apart,
Yes.
and
Yes.
slavery would have
Mm-hmm.
continued for we don't know
Mm-hmm.
how many more years before eventually it would have been abolished. So, but anyhow, we're getting a little bit ahead
Yeah.
of ourselves, but it's you know, but
We do
Lincoln
that
really is
from
a
time to
yeah,
time.
yeah, yeah, that's allowed. We don't not everything
Yeah.
has to go in chronological order, right? But Lincoln
Hmm.
really is a moral giant, and his dates were 1809 to 1865. Sadly, cut
Yes.
off by assassination. He was murdered,
Yeah.
and completely
Hmm.
irrational because it was done by a Southern sympathizer, and the South would have
Hmm.
been vastly better off if Lincoln had remained alive as president than after he was when he was killed. But
Yeah.
we'll
Yes.
get to that point. So
Yeah.
I know you're a big Lincoln fan. I'm sure you have a lot to say about. And by
I
the way, before
I
you get
do.
started, let me ask you one thing. I don't know, 5 6 years ago, was it Spielberg's film Lincoln with Daniel Day Lewis? Uh,
Yes.
focusing on the near the end of Lincoln's
Team of
presidency.
Rivals. Yes. Well, actually, Team of Rivals is a film based on the book, which was also good, but it really focuses on the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yeah.
That's the main focus of what went through and how it got passed, and
Well,
very enjoyable film.
the movie I'm
Go
the
ahead.
movie I'm thinking of, I think the name of it was just Lincoln, wasn't it? Spielberg directed, Daniel Day Lewis starred as Lincoln,
No,
and
oh,
focusing it.
actually, you're right. I'm sorry. The book is called Team of Rivals. You're absolutely right, Andy. The book is called Team of Rivals, but the film is called Lincoln. Wow, how did I get that wrong? Yes,
Well,
with Daniel Day
but
Lewis. We're talking about
the
the same thing.
difference, yeah, yeah. Daniel Day Lewis won like his third Oscar for, but
Yeah,
as best actor.
well
But
deserved.
but
Yeah.
yeah, he's a great actor, and he was great. But that Spielberg's film focused on the drive to pass the 13th Amendment. Remember, to get the votes in Congress
Yes.
to get the 13th Amendment, and it was a gripping story. I thought it was a really powerful movie.
Absolutely. And we have in the notes, Ari Armstrong wrote a review of it for the Objective Standard. He wrote a review of the film. And I don't know why I think, well, you know how books, stay in your
Yeah,
mind.
you're
And
you're a
so
bookworm.
why,
You got them all. Yeah, they're all
but
merged together in
but
your
right,
head.
it's just plain Lincoln. Yeah, just plain Lincoln is the title of it, and a great film about again a pivotal event in American history, the Emancipation
Yeah,
Proclamation. Hmm.
and
Hmm.
absolutely, and
Absolutely, we'll talk about that. We'll definitely
yeah,
talk about that. But
and
yeah, his
Spielberg.
background.
Yeah, Spielberg's a great storyteller,
Yeah,
right? So there's no doubt about that. And
absolutely.
he
Yes.
told it. One of my favorite films is Raiders of the Lost Ark. I just love that
Oh
movie.
yeah.
But that's great. It's a great film. But yeah, I thought the movie Lincoln was outstanding. So I guess we could get to that when we get to the
We
push
will.
for
We will.
the 13th
Yes.
Amendment.
Yeah. Yeah, so many
So,
pivotal moments we'll talk about. But yeah, his background, again, honest Abe, known for splitting logs, 1 year of formal education in his life, but a bookworm, and
oh yeah,
became a lawyer by simply by studying, came from humble background. So Lincoln was the self-made man that America is, is based on. The place, this is, America was the place for this kind of person to rise from a single log cabin to the White House.
yeah, definitely. You remember when we were kids, though, the legend they used to tell that Abraham Lincoln was born in a log cabin that he helped his father build. I mean, that's a pretty good
Yeah.
trick if you can, if you could do it. Even a
Yeah.
giant like Lincoln, couldn't have done that, but he did.
Hmm.
But the story that he grew up in a log cabin on the frontier is true. Well,
Yeah,
that
it
is
is
that is
true.
true. A lot
It
of the
is true. And we
legends
could
about
say
Lincoln, yeah, that's a lot of
a
the
lot of them
legends
are
are true.
true.
Yeah,
And one of the things, Lincoln was a great self promoter. We might think of him as being like overly humble, but he was fiercely competitive, and he created this image of himself, of this guy in a log cabin who just reads on his own, 1 year of formal education and honesty as a lawyer. How's that for a catch? Because lawyers are known as shysters, and how they you know do anything to win a case. But he branded that term, honest Abe. So he maximized all the different media forms, newspaper, Morse code, and photography later on in life, to give this image of himself as one of a kind. Because we
right.
could, just looking at him, we had this beautiful Daniel Chester French statue in the Lincoln Memorial, but
It is
nobody
beautiful.
looked like Lincoln. Nobody in history, right, looked looked like
Yeah, yeah.
Lincoln.
This is true. This is true. I was going to say, yeah, he's not Brad Pitt, you know. I mean, but yeah, he's not like this classically good looking dude, but he's striking. Right, it's just a striking
Yes.
appearance, and given his height and that kind of raw boned physical
Yes.
power that he
Yes.
has. He was a rail splitter. He was a he was
Yep.
very adroit and powerful with an axe. He was a champion wrestler. From
Hmm.
what I've read about, he had this
Yeah.
powerful, manly kind of presence. And you were talking about his
Manly.
image that he crafted. Yeah,
Yeah.
manly
Yeah.
presence.
Manly image. Go ahead, Andy. Go ahead.
I just
Sorry.
want to say one thing about you. We talk about crafting his image. Best of my knowledge, 19th century American history, and I'm just a dilettante here. The Lincoln Douglas debates were like the first great media event in American history,
Yes.
right? They had runners taking the transcripts, and stenography onto the trains into Chicago and everything. It's a really good story that we got to tell it when we get to
Yeah,
that part
when
of
we get
Lincoln's
to it,
life.
and
Yeah, yeah.
not too long, because his childhood, not too much known, in the sense that nothing really special, but because that you haven't already covered, tall, lean, physically assertive, and intellectually. So mind body integration was built into Lincoln. He knew the power of words, of the English language. So
Well,
Churchill
yeah.
looked to Lincoln for the power of the spoken and the written word, and he knew how to master that. And we'll see that certainly, play out with Gettysburg Address and all the different allusions in his writing that led to his reputation. But yeah, so goes to law school, family moves
Let me
in
make
and
one
out.
other point. Let me
Yeah.
make one other
Mhm.
point
Go
about
ahead.
his childhood is that he was such a bookworm, reading, writing poetry and everything, just voracious reader. He didn't like the hard physical labor for all of his strength and his rail splitting exploits
Yes.
and his ability as a wrestler.
Mhm.
He did not like the hard physical labor on a farm. Not that I blame him. I wouldn't either. But his family thought he was
Yeah,
lazy. It's funny. His family thought he was lazy because he was such a bookworm.
they.
But
That's
he
right.
showed them he showed them eventually. There's different kinds of hard work, and
Great point, Andy, which we should elaborate on, because if you remember it, back in the 19th century and for much of world history, 90% of work was on farms, and it was
Yeah,
manual labor. It wasn't it wasn't the intellectual labor, but Lincoln saw ahead, and he saw the value of books, and where he would be criticized for being lazy. He clearly he proved, being a wrestler and splitting logs and all these things, that he was physically able. But to him, the mind was, it was more important, and that's where he put his efforts. And guess what? If he ended up being a wrestler, would we have known about him? If he ended up being a farmer, would we have
or a
known
farmer,
about him?
right.
Right, right,
I just want
exactly. So
to make a point here. You piggybacking on what you said in support of capitalism. It's the Industrial Revolution that changed all of that. 90% of
yes,
labor was
yes, it did.
brutal, backbreaking work on
Yes.
the farms and everything. Kids had to work on the farms because otherwise they wouldn't have enough to eat. And with all the
Hmm.
leftist attacks on capitalism and industrial revolution are false. Parents wanted the kids to work in the factories because the work was so much lighter. They work in the machinery rather than doing the backbreaking work on the farm. So the industrial revolution that changed that. And Lincoln, I don't know if Lincoln could foresee what was going to happen in the northern states after the Civil War, but I think he had some idea that this was
I
probably
think
was the wave
so,
of the future.
Andy. Yeah, I think so, because it happened right after his death. We say post-Civil War America was the freest and most industrial. That's when the Industrial Revolution came to America, was right after
Yeah,
Lincoln's
yeah,
assassination. So he
and
foresaw
Lincoln's,
that for sure.
right. Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. And Lincoln's, animus towards slavery. Slavery is part and parcel of an agrarian, lifestyle. And
Yes,
the,
yes.
the Industrial Revolution hired free labor. It's much more
Hmm.
obviously it's highly moral. Anything is compared to slavery. Anyhow,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
so yeah, I always remembered self-taught in law, right? You see, he
Yeah.
read the law books on his own, didn't go to law school. What did he tell people? I didn't study law with anyone, and then became a very successful lawyer.
Very successful. Yeah,
Yeah,
very, and that was the right. And he, he was a good lawyer, but one of the things that tied in with that was debate. Part of being a lawyer is making a case, building cases, and debates were a big part of Lincoln's future. I mean, we could just fill a couple of more concretes that he moved to Springfield when he was 1837, I think it was. So he's like 28 years old or so.
mm,
And that's the first time he runs for some kind of office. And he actually loses the first time. And he actually says it was the only time he ever lost to a popular vote. And a couple of years later, he meets Mary Todd and falls in love with her. And they end up marrying, has three sons. First one, Robert, was basically the only one who survived. So a big part of Lincoln's character, and we have to mention this, the fact that he suffered from depression and failed, lived through so many disasters. His mother died of drinking spoiled milk. He had two sisters,
yeah,
a young brother
yeah.
died childbirth, and a sister. So death was all around
Yeah, and his
him.
his his
And
older sister was her name Sarah. I think took
yeah,
care of him after their mother died, and then she died in childbirth. I think at a very early age,
that's
which was
that's right.
devastating. Which
That's
was
right.
devastating
Yeah,
to him. His his
yeah.
big sister
So
would have been more like a mother to him.
that's right. That's right. And so part of Lincoln's mystique and his success was dealing with struggle. How many times do we say this, Andy, in the hero show? Adversity. So whatever's being thrown at him, he's able to deal with it. And he, like many people, he plunges himself into work as a result. So, between law office and then going on to the learning about debating and making that a part of who he was. And when the Mexican War breaks out, this is a moment, 1845, 46, 47. Here's where slavery becomes a bigger issue, because now,
Right.
the new territories, will they become slave territories? And Lincoln is opposed to, he was opposed to the war, but more so the fact that what are we going to do with new territories? And um, again,
Yeah,
he
he
ran as the
supported
Whig
and
Party. Yeah.
he supported what was known as the Wilmot Proviso back then, right? Which was
Yes, that's
a
right.
proposed legislation to ban slavery in the newly acquired territories from Mexico, but it failed. Unfortunately, it
That's right.
failed. Well,
Yes.
I just want
Yeah.
to say
Fortunately, it
one
did
thing about
fail.
one last thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
it did. One last thing about his childhood. Is
Hmm.
that his family, mother and father were Baptists, as some Baptist denomination or part of the Baptist faith that strongly opposed slavery, and so he grew up in a in an anti-slavery household. And he
That's
always said
right.
he was not he wanted to. Of course, we'll see when we get to the Lincoln Douglas debates. He wanted to. He opposed the extension of slavery into the new states. At that point he didn't want to abolish it yet. But I know he said any
That's
number
right.
of times that he had a strong personal repugnance, for the institution of human slavery, and he eventually morphed
Yeah.
into not surprisingly, eventually morphed into an abolitionist.
That's right. That's right. On moral grounds.
Yeah,
That was another thing. He had a strong moral compass about right and wrong, and was always against slavery personally.
right.
And when we come to 1860, we'll mention where he's not as clear. He's a bit more vague on that. But yeah, so 1854, just setting the context as the country is evolving, and the slave issue is becoming the make or break. So we have the Kansas-Nebraska Act, uh, where the decision is, okay, if you go to those states, you can decide whether it's going to be a free state or slave state.
Yeah,
And the Dred
popular
Scott
sovereignty.
case,
Right,
popular
popular
sovereignty,
sovereignty, they
yeah, and
call it, and leads
so
to
the
bleeding
rising
Kansas. Well, at least to bleeding Kansas, where John Brown,
John Brown,
became
yep.
famous. Yeah,
The famous painting, yeah, the famous painting of
yeah,
him holding the rifle, and that's the band Kansas. That was their logo on their first album.
yeah. It was bloody.
So
Bleeding Kansas was bloody. Back and conflict between pro-slavers and anti-slavers, like John Brown.
yeah,
And
that's
by
right.
the way, just as an aside, when I was
Hmm.
a kid, I was reading about John Brown, and I thought this dude's a fanatic, and I was like, and I remember Robert E. Lee was like a hero because he helped
Yeah.
suppress. He led the troops that
Hmm.
suppressed John Brown's uprising. I'm more and more inclined to think John Brown was a hero now. That what does it take to get rid of slavery? I mean, is it can it be done peacefully? I mean, I guess the Brits
He did
did it
not think so.
eventually.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So
Brown
yeah,
didn't think so. Yeah.
no.
Hmm. Hmm.
But anyhow,
So Dred Scott
another
case as well. Yep. Dred Scott
story.
case,
Go ahead.
is again, it's another slap in the face against abolitionists, but the movement continues growing, and now we're at 1858, which is for the U.S. Senate. There is the Lincoln Douglas debates, and as you were saying, uh, so here Lincoln was an unknown at the time. Douglas was real famous. So
Right.
Lincoln's idea is, well, guess what? I Here is how I will make a name for myself. I will match myself with somebody real famous. You think of in boxing Chuck Wepner, right? When Wepner fights
The
Muhammad
Bayonne
Ali, he
bleeder.
was
Yeah.
the Bayonne bleeder, right? But he put himself on the map by fighting the most famous boxer in the world, which actually led to the film Rocky. I don't want to go too far off course here, but that's what Lincoln did. He attached himself to the most famous debater, and then he used the technology, like you said, to have the stories of the debate be sent around the nation to all the big cities. So people are reading about this. What's this guy Lincoln saying? And yeah, and he is different from Douglas
Oh yeah.
in his thoughts on slavery, and is now he's carving out his own image that a
Right.
lot of people who didn't know who he was, now they're aware of that.
Yeah. Stephen Douglas, U.S. Senator, he was a popular sovereignty guy. He thought in
Yes,
the territories as they became new states that the slavery issue should be decided by vote.
right,
If the
right,
people in the new state vote for slavery, so be it. If they vote against it, so
yeah,
be it. Lincoln, of course, morally opposed to slavery, wanted to not extend, refuse to extend slavery into the new territories and into the new states. That was the Lincoln Douglas debates were focused on other issues. Involved other issues, but the real focus was on the slavery
That's
issue. This
right.
1858, after all. So the abolitionists are pushing hard, and the slave owners are
Yeah.
pushing back, and this is heading towards what we know, the bloodiest conflict in American history by far. So
That's
yeah,
right.
I'm with Lincoln on this. You can't vote for slavery. You can't go.
No,
It's not.
no,
It's
you can't
completely
vote for it.
un-American. It's completely un-American,
Yes.
right? The principle of individual rights. Thomas Jefferson, a slave owner, individuals have inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Uh, but yeah,
Exactly.
no, Lincoln. Yeah,
And right, Lincoln. So Douglas, we can call a pragmatist. He was basically leave it up to the people. Not he didn't go by the moral principle the way that Lincoln did. So in
right.
addition, and that's when he gives his famous House Divided speech as well, which again, a house against itself cannot stand. And he writes a biography.
Lincoln had a way with words, didn't he?
He
I mean, he
definitely
had a
did.
way
Yeah.
with words.
hmm hmm So writes a biography, goes to New York and speaks there, gets massive audiences. So where he was only a couple of years ago, where nobody really knew him, now he's center stage for the new party, the
Yeah,
new party,
yeah.
the
He
Whig
was a
party,
Whig.
kind of
He was a
fades
Whig
out.
all. Yeah, he was a Whig all those
That's
years. Here comes the Republican Party now, the party of the abolitionists. Lincoln's
yes,
not yet an abolitionist, but he's simpatico with them, personally
yes,
opposed to it on moral grounds, like you said, wants to ban
yep.
its extension into the new states, and so yeah, he becomes a major player in the gestating Republican Party.
Which was founded by William Seward. And Seward had a lot more experience than Lincoln, a lot more credibility. It was assumed he would win the first nomination, but he didn't. Lincoln won. And what does he do? This is kind of one of the things. So now if we go with the title of the book, Team of Rivals, one of the things Lincoln was fabulous at, which actually Washington, talk about one and two best presidents, was getting people who disagreed with him to work together so that he could hear everybody's opinion, and they he would see he would let everyone have a say and then make up his own mind. And Seward called Lincoln all backwards, this and that, uneducated on this and that, because Seward thought he was the rightful person to become president, but ends up becoming a best friend, of Lincoln, and the film shows it well. The Lincoln film shows it well. My first introduction, Andy, to Seward was in Madison Square Park, the entrance on 23rd and Madison. He's sitting there, and I always wondered who's this guy. And then I read about his story and how powerful this man was before Lincoln, kind of leapfrogged over him. But
Well,
that
we
story is
remember
great. That
we remember Seward's
Go ahead.
Folly, right? Seward's Folly
Seward's
wasn't
Valley,
what,
Alaska.
yeah, was he was
Buying-
was he Secretary of State? I forget in what administration. He was the one who
yes,
pushed for the purchase of Alaska from
purchase
the
of
from the
Alaska, and they called it
from the
Seward's
Rush
Folly.
from the
Yeah,
Russians,
yeah,
right?
that's
Yeah.
right.
So it
Yep, yep.
didn't turn out to be such a folly.
No, and after we
I'll,
finish the Civil War, I'll have something else. I'll have something else to say about him. But an incredible man, and basically like Lincoln's right hand man for the course of his presidency. But what happens? The way the voting goes, all the northern states completely vote for Lincoln. None of them vote for, none of the southern states vote for him. But by this time in the country, that's all you need to do was just win the North for Lincoln to be elected. But the South, especially South Carolina, was threatening um, secession if Lincoln won. And sure enough, once Lincoln won the nomination, we mentioned last time you asked me who preceded him, James Buchanan. Buchanan actually left the office. He didn't even do like a proper handoff to Lincoln. He ran for his life because he knew storm clouds were brewing, and so Lincoln comes in. The South is ready to secede before he's even does his oath. December of 1860, the South Carolina leaves, and then one by one the deep South takes over. Some of the border states took a little bit longer. So here's why I admire Lincoln so much, Andy. I'll start with this. No other president had their entire presidency while the country was at war with itself. And we need to keep that in mind when we judge him, because he definitely made some mistakes, but identify the context of where this man was. And with that in mind, while the country's at war with itself, and what was his, now we'll go to his famous description. Preserving the Union was more important than ending slavery. That was like his platform.
Right.
Okay.
That was Lincoln.
If I could preserve, if I could preserve the Union without freeing slaves, that's what I would do. If I could do it by freeing slaves, that's what I would do. But preserving the United States of America was his number one, goal in the presidency. And for that, he was criticized, even like Frederick Douglass and others criticized him for not being, and Seward for not being, as saying abolition should be number one. Go ahead. You wanted to jump in there?
No, yeah, absolutely. I think you're making a really good point. No president in U.S. history was entered office faced with the calamitous circumstances that Abraham Lincoln was. Because bad enough to have, like, if you come into office and, like you said, storm clouds are brewing, you have to go fight the Germans or the British or whoever it is. But to have to fight an intra-American war that's going to be, it's going to be the bloodiest war in U.S. history, because every person killed on both sides is an American. And
American, yeah.
Yeah. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the Civil War is more Americans were killed than all the other wars put together.
Combined, 620,000. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just a bloodbath, and you know it's going to come to that if you're going to go to war to preserve the Union. And Lincoln was absolutely determined to do that. And so, I mean, we could question that if and a lot of libertarians today fault Lincoln for that, on the premise that the ties between these two, first of all, they think slavery would have died out on its own because it's an uneconomic, it's not an economically viable system, which is true, and that free labor would have replaced it, and the South would have industrialized more like it did, and the bonds would have brought the two back together. That's all very possible. But we don't know that with any degree of certainty. That's, there's a logical fallacy called hypothesis contrary to fact. It's like, what would happen if the Nazis had won World War II? There's no way to know with any certainty. We can speculate. It's fascinating. Same thing here. What would have happened if Lincoln had let the Southern states secede and not gone to war to preserve the Union? We don't know if slavery would have died out. We don't know if the bonds that tied the two parts of the country together would have reasserted itself 30, 40 years in the future, and the country would have been reunited. There's no way to know that for certain. So Lincoln made a tough call under the most calamitous circumstances ever faced by any incoming president, and we can go back and forth on this. I think at the end of the day, despite the bloodbath, I side with Lincoln on this. I think it was the right thing to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So even listen to this, Andy, to get to the White House, he takes a train, and there's already the fear that he's going to get assassinated. Before getting to the White House, he has to change trains like more than like 5 times, going midnight in Baltimore. That was where they really thought they would get him, was in Baltimore. And he had Pinkerton.
Maryland was a hotbed of Southern sympathizers.
That's right. And so, but he does make it to the White House. And what's the first thing? The Fort Sumter in um, off the coast of North
Charleston.
Carolina. Yeah, and they're um, this is a
Charleston, isn't
federal,
it?
that's right, Charleston, South Carolina.
Yeah.
This is federal
Okay.
property, and who's going to fire the first shot? In other words, who is going to start the war? And Lincoln does not want the North to do that, so he sends some boats out there, not with military supplies, but with food. And sure enough, that works because the South are the ones who start firing, which makes the North galvanize, um, saying, "Okay, they started it, and now we have to take some action," and thus the beginning of the Civil War.
Yeah. I was just thinking when we did the villain show last week, we had that eerie music. For when we did John Dewey,
Yeah.
the
Hmm.
music was perfect. The music for the hero show of Abraham Lincoln probably should be the Battle Hymn of the Republic.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
it's really,
Exactly.
really,
Yeah.
really,
Truth
really
is marching on.
religious,
Yeah.
but yeah, but
Yeah.
it was the song of the Union soldiers, who
Yes.
ultimately made possible by battlefield victory the Emancipation
Hmm.
Proclamation, and then later on the 13th Amendment. But
Hmm.
anyhow,
Hmm.
uh, so um, Lincoln's president, and the war's not going well for the North. At
Not at
the
the
start of
beginning.
the
No,
war.
they
No,
thought it would be a cakewalk, but no, not at the beginning. And Lincoln went to Robert E. Lee to have him fight for the Union, and Lee said, "I cannot draw my sword upon a Confederate against Virginia." I mean, that
yeah,
was clearly one of the biggest decisions in American history, because if Lee did not fight for the South, the war would have been over in 2 weeks. I
yeah,
mean, it's
very,
it's very
very,
sad.
very, very, very possible. Yes, it is sad. Lee
Hmm.
Lee reminds me of that way of like Patrick Henry and these guys, in the founding period, who still thought of themselves as Virginians rather than as Americans.
Yes,
And it's
yes,
I think it
yeah.
was a tragic error on Robert E. Lee's part, but that's the way
Hmm.
he felt his loyalty was to Virginia rather than to the United States. But
Yeah.
Lincoln searched long and hard for a general who could match Lee before he finally found, Ulysses S. Grant and, of course, William
Yep.
Tecumseh Sherman.
Yeah. McClellan failed. Burnside failed. Hooker failed. And then, yeah, if we fast forward to
Meade, what
the
about
weekend
Meade?
of July,
Meade and
and
Meade,
Meade was the last
yeah,
one. You're right. Right. We could drink to that. Right. So then the weekend of July 4th, 1863, two of the most famous battles, pivotal battles in the Civil War. And I wrote about this, a short piece in the Objective Standard. We know about Gettysburg, which went on July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in Pennsylvania. But just as important was Vicksburg, which
mhm.
was on the Mississippi, where the North had captured the town. They had it under siege, and then finally, on July 3rd, they took it over. And
And
what that
that
did
was
was
Grant, right? That was
that was
Grant,
Grant.
wasn't it? Yeah,
That was Grant and Sherman. Actually, that was the two of them working together. They cut off the Mississippi for the South, which was clearly a major transportation hub, and that was when Lincoln said, "I have my man." Why? Because guess what? Oh, Grant is a drunk, and all Lincoln said was, "He wins battles." Right?
yeah,
He
right.
win he wins
He fights.
battles.
Lincoln
So
says something like
yeah,
he fights.
yeah, not like
Yeah,
these other guys who gave every advantage up whenever they had an advantage. And so in Vicksburg, um, after Vicksburg, Lincoln gives
and that's in
Grant command.
the state of Mississippi. Vicksburg's in the state of Mississippi, right?
Yes,
On the
Mississippi. That's
Mississippi,
right. Exactly. Yeah, that's right.
and
That's
it
right.
opens up
And
For Sherman, opens up the possibility of Sherman's march to the sea,
that's
which
right.
broke the back of the Confederacy and
Totally.
finally
Which was
shortened the
which the
war.
whole. That's right. When we'll give Sherman coming up, we'll certainly be
Yeah,
talking
we got
about his
Sherman on the
his
Sherman
story.
show.
But and what Grant does is Grant chases Lee. So the importance of Gettysburg was this was the first time the South went into Northern territory. Okay, this is Pennsylvania, Southern Pennsylvania is Gettysburg, and they didn't win, they didn't lose. There was it was somewhat evenly balanced. A few thousand more, I think. Confederates died
Yeah, it was a
than
bloodbath
Union,
at
but it
Gettysburg.
was
That was a
it was a bloodbath, absolutely. And the rest of the war, Lee was on the run, but of course the tragedy of Gettysburg led Lincoln a couple of months later, November 19th, to deliver his Gettysburg Address, which we all memorized this, right, Andy? As kids, 4 score and 7 years
yeah,
ago,
yes. The
our
beauty of
fathers
Lincoln's language.
put forth
Yeah,
on this
the right.
continent, yeah, a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. I mean, that is
And
like,
it's
oh
only
boy,
like 250 or 300 words.
yeah,
But when we were kids, you always have somebody get up in front of the assembly and had memorized the Gettysburg Address, and we said, right,
exactly,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And
that's what it was,
today,
yeah.
today, I don't know how much American history the kids are being taught, but
No, I
when
don't
we
know.
were in
That's why
school,
they
there
got to
was
come
there
here for
was
the hero show to learn history. That's all. That's our answer for the youth of today. Come to the hero show to learn actual
there you
history.
go. I
But
like that. I like
uh,
that answer. Yeah, I think
so
Lincoln is so eloquent. He's so eloquent. The wording of the Gettysburg Address is just beautiful. It's
and it happened so
breathtaking.
fast because the photographers weren't even ready to take pictures. He was up and out because the main speaker had like a 3 hour speech that he was planning to give. So from Lincoln's perspective, he didn't think this would be so memorable. He used to carry, I love this about him, the famous top hat, and he would carry his speeches like notes, not the whole speech, but in his top hat, he'd take it off and just read a couple of notes, and he would write while he was on the train. So again, he knew the power of the spoken word and the written word. He was just a master. And Gettysburg Address, like we say, I mean, after Patrick Henry, is there a more famous speech in American history? I don't think Martin Luther King. Those are like the three top. I think
Yeah,
one, two, and three. Would flip a coin, which is one, two, or three. But
yeah. Give me
he's
liberty or give
honoring,
me death. Yeah,
yeah.
right, right. And
And I have a dream,
I have a dream. Speak right.
and 4 score and 7 years ago, and so um, this is, and I'll tell you, Andy, I don't know. Have you ever been to Gettysburg? I went there
No,
with Carrie
no,
Ann
I've
several
never been
years
there.
ago. I just like the Lincoln Memorial. There's just this somber feeling that I have. There's not this like joy, this that I think of Americanism and optimism. Gettysburg, we had an
Yeah,
eerie feeling that boy,
yeah.
there's just so much death.
That's why I didn't want to go there.
You're
It's
right.
just a
You're.
bloodbath.
I
It was a
don't.
bloodbath.
Yeah, but there's history there, and it's like
Oh yeah, for
sometimes I got to
sure.
just see it to know
I know.
that boy and pay tribute. I mean, what a way to pay tribute to the fallen, on both sides, which is what Lincoln did. So now this is November 6, 1863, and his presidency, his reelection now is being threatened because this war is lasting way longer than people thought it would. McClellan's, he wants to run against Lincoln and thinks he can and make a deal with the South to end the
Right.
war. Um, but as you alluded to, Sherman tears across the South and basically captures Christmas Day, 1863, captures Savannah, and sends Lincoln. I give to you all this cotton that I just somehow came upon, and this will help help the North. And after Sherman's victory across the South, the tide, the
Yeah,
rest of the
that
short
broke the
few
back
more
of the
months,
Confederacy.
he broke their spirit. Yeah,
Military. Yeah, yeah, and like the late great John Lewis, Dr. John Lewis would
yes,
say
yes,
the
yeah.
the object in war is to break the will of the enemy to their will to fight. And Sherman showed
That's
the
right.
South that it was hopeless.
Yeah.
It was hopeless.
Yeah.
And to this day, if you
I,
go to Atlanta, speaking of
right.
Atlanta,
Yeah.
which Sherman burned a
hmm
lot of it to the ground, you go to
Yeah.
Atlanta and say Sherman's one of your heroes, you probably going to be in a fight.
Hmm.
You know?
Yeah, it's true.
So,
In the movie, the Gone with the Wind, they don't even call him by name. They refer to him as the Juggernaut. Okay, that's their reference to Sherman, and it's pretty accurate. So, actually, one important point I skipped, Andy, was 1862. So Frederick Douglass, the first hero that you and John covered on the Hero Show, he went to Lincoln and he said, "You have to let blacks fight. They have to fight for their own freedom. They need to know the importance of to become self-made is fighting for their own freedom." And Lincoln said, "Well, if I let that happen, a lot of the white soldiers will vacate, and we're going to lose the war." And that was one of the things that McClellan um, said. A lot of military advisors said that, but eventually Lincoln was convinced to let them fight for the proper reason, and so in 1862, they were. It was the first time blacks were allowed, like fully. And in fact, from the South, he said, "You come and fight for us for your own freedom." I mean, how's that for
yeah, well,
an
the
incentive?
Glory Brigade, right? The
That's right. That's right.
the
Exactly. Exactly.
Massachusetts regiment. Movie
Yeah.
about them not so long ago. Also,
That's
right?
right.
Yeah,
Hmm.
he's.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
So yeah, so
these
that was
these these young black guys are motivated, right? They have something to fight for. It's freedom
that's
for
right.
themselves, maybe their family members and friends who are still enslaved in the South. So
Yeah,
yeah, it was. I think Lincoln was a very adroit politician, like you said. He knew how to, how to
that's right.
compromise, how
Hmm.
to play off one side against another. So if the
Hmm.
blacks have their own regiment, then maybe the racists who are in the white racists who are in the Northern Army, won't desert or quit or leave the army.
Yeah.
It was a very intelligent compromise to make. Yeah,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
United States wasn't ready yet for integration. Today, going back for the last 50 years, as the Jim Crow mentality has and the white supremacist mentality has died and dwindled. It's
Yes.
still around, but it's severely diminished.
It's
Thank
so
God.
minuscule. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, today this idea Joe Biden has that it's the leading danger is just he's just completely out of touch with reality.
Hmm.
But anyhow,
Hmm.
today, in the Marines or whatever, you have white and blacks and Latinos and Asians, the guys fighting side by side, and that's it's good. I think racism amongst most Americans has diminished dramatically. But back then, no, it was too that was integration was too new of an idea. I mean, racism
Yeah.
has dominated human history. It still does in many parts of the world. The Rwandan genocide could be served as Exhibit
Hmm.
A.
Hmm.
Tribalism,
Yeah.
racism, national, all that stuff. But the United States wasn't ready for integration then. But Lincoln did the right thing. Again, he made the right call. Made the right under the most difficult circumstances.
That's right. And parallel with that, and right after it was, now we can talk more actually about Emancipation Proclamation, which is what the film Lincoln centers on, and this idea that blacks should be free. We should correct this error in America's founding, which I don't think it was ready to address at that time. But over the decades, when the hostility and the brutality became more, and the impracticality on top of that, so the immoral and the impractical aspects of slavery became much more widely known. And so Lincoln wrote the Emancipation Proclamation, got it passed, waited for a victory. One of the main things is he didn't want to do it after a loss because it would come off as like an act of desperation. So he did it after one of the important victories in during the Civil War, and this is it. This is the correction in America's founding documents that okay, slavery is abolished. That is that, and uh, will always get credit, for that, for writing the Emancipation Proclamation, and
Well, the
the two.
Emancipation Proclamation, let me see if I remember my American history here. The Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves in the areas that the Northern troops had already occupied, right?
Yes,
but it
that's right.
took the 13th Amendment in 1865 to ban slavery for
Yes,
good forever
right. That's right.
anywhere in these United States. And
That's right.
Lincoln pushed for that too. Lincoln,
That's right.
in a
Exactly.
certain way, yeah. Lincoln had not been an abolitionist, but now, and, you can see the growth here, the genesis, the moral genesis here, because what's all this for? All this blood and guts and and
Yeah.
everything.
Hmm.
What's it all mean? We reunite the Union, and the South still has slavery, let's say, and we have the same problem tearing
Yeah.
the country apart, like
Yeah.
Thomas Jefferson foresaw decades ago that slavery was going to
Yep.
tear the country apart, and he was right.
Hmm.
This has to end. Then there's
Yeah.
meaning to the all these guys lost their lives. Then there's some meaning, to this.
Yeah.
They're heroes, and they made
And this is a
possible.
moral. Exactly. This is a
Yeah,
moral point
yeah,
where Lincoln gets credit as a moralist,
yeah,
knowing that this
yeah,
is
yeah,
immoral to own another person. It's
yeah.
absolutely immoral.
It has anywhere in the world, but above all, has no place in America, the country that was founded explicitly on the principle
Yeah.
that individuals have an inalienable right to liberty. You know,
Yep.
Thomas
Yeah.
Jefferson, the slave owner, wrote in one of the great
Hmm.
ironies.
Yeah.
Lincoln seals the deal. He completes the meaning of the U.S. founding. There's not slavery
Yes.
still exists. The communists have gulags with massive slave labor. The Islamic world, it's you can't enslave a fellow Muslim, but infidels are fair game, and they'll enslave
Hmm.
Christians.
Hmm.
In Sudan, there's probably still thousands and thousands of black slaves in Sudan.
Yeah.
It's horrible, but certainly above all has no place in the United States. The principle of individual rights,
No.
just prohibits that. And Lincoln was the one who took the principle of individual rights and universalized it. You know,
Yes.
universalized it,
Yes.
not just for white men or white people, but for
Hmm.
all Americans.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so
Yeah. And
this is why we honor him so much.
absolutely.
As
And
objectivists,
one,
supporters of individual rights, Lincoln completed
yes.
the promise of the American founding.
Yeah. So one, if we talk about a couple of mistakes, I think one mistake he made was bringing for his, when he got reelected, he had Andrew Johnson as his vice president. Johnson was from the South, and Lincoln wanted to bridge the two. He
Yeah,
saw the end was coming in the war, and he wanted to bridge the two. But this turned out to be a disaster because, okay, so if we go again with dates, I think it was April, when was it? 9th. April 9th, Lee surrenders to Grant at Appomattox. And then April 14th, the man couldn't even enjoy the victory. 5, 6 days later, Lincoln gets shot by John Wilkes Booth in a famous uh, play that was happening, and dies the next
yeah, and
day, April 15th.
yeah, and it's completely senseless on the part of John Wilkes Booth, who was a Southern sympathizer, because it
Yeah,
was well known that Lincoln's attitude during Reconstruction was going to be much more lenient towards the South
yeah,
than
yeah,
than the the the, the real intense war hawks in Congress who
yeah.
understandably were bitter. And they were
Hmm.
abolitionists. The South caused this bloody war. The South had slavery. The Confederacy started the war, made necessary this bloody war to preserve the Union, and two, abolish slavery. Understandably, they were bitter towards the Confederacy, towards the Southern states. But Lincoln was wiser. That's not the way to
Yeah.
bring the country back together. That's not the way to do.
No.
Very harsh terms for for the defeated Southern states. So for a
Hmm.
Southern sympathizer to assassinate Lincoln were completely against the
Yeah.
self-interest of the Southern states, and it led to a brutal Reconstruction and bitterness.
Yeah.
I don't know, for maybe gone by this time, but the racism directed against the blacks in the South was brutal for a very long time. with the Jim
Yeah,
Crow
for
laws.
100 years.
Yeah,
the better part
yeah,
of 100 years.
yeah,
After
yeah,
that,
yeah,
it
yeah.
remained
Right.
awful.
Yeah. From
Hmm.
Reconstruction till the Civil Rights Movement is a full century of brutal
Yeah.
subjugation of Black American citizens. And it may have, again, it's a
Hmm.
hypothesis contrary to fact. We don't know what would have happened had Lincoln lived. But we know Lincoln's policies would have been more lenient. And it may have led to, more better race relations than the harsh treatment of the South by Republicans after the Civil War ended. Was what
Yeah.
100 years before with they called the Solid South. No Republican, or
Everyone. Yeah.
was very
E- e-
rare. Every rare that any Republican running for president or whatever won one of the Southern states. The South was solidly Democratic. They hated
Yep.
the Republicans,
And the
and
KKK.
and
I
they,
mean, again, here's where
yeah,
today's Democrats like reverse. They reversed history, but yeah, the KKK was born out of Reconstruction, which again, it was awful. And Andrew Johnson, as the president, was overly sympathetic to the South and didn't go the way Lincoln would have gone. So there was definitely a big mess there. If I could circle back to William Seward, so one thing during the war, Britain, who was addicted to cotton, as they said, they with their treaty with the United States was that they have to ally. They're not allowed to ally with someone who's fighting the United States. And at
that's
that time,
tough.
the Confederacy
Yeah,
was fighting the United States. Okay, they were called
yeah,
the
yeah,
Confederacy
right.
of the United States, and they had all the same things except slavery and states' rights were like the two big distinctions between the North. And because there were actual um, repercussions to this, because Britain violated their policy, so Seward says to them, he says, "I'll tell you what, why don't you just give us Canada and then we wash our hands, all right?" And that's those are the terms. Just give us Canada.
That's a good deal.
Exactly. So he already got Alaska. So just give us
Right,
Canada,
from
Britain, and then and
from
then
the
we
Russians.
wash our hands. Right, right. So that was Seward's attempt to get back at the British
Well,
for continuing to trade for slaves.
that's audacious. Um, you
Yeah,
reminded
yeah.
me, one thing we should say about we don't know what would have happened to Reconstruction if Lincoln had lived. As a
No, it's
guess,
hard
as
to
a
recreate.
speculation.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
no, it's impossible to know. It's a hypothesis
Yeah,
contrary to fact. A lot would be a logical fallacy, but we can speculate. And I think Lincoln was such a master of dealing with people, and his tendency here would be more lenient than the congressional Republicans were
yeah.
towards the defeated Southern states. As a guess, I think Reconstruction would have been less bitter pill for the
Yes,
Southerners to
I think
swallow,
so.
and it might have led to less you know less propagation of racist attitudes,
Hmm.
brutal racism to come under the Jim Crow laws and the lynchings. The
Hmm.
Klan might not never have been birthed. It's possible. It's possible
Yeah,
had Lincoln, but there's no way to
yeah,
know, and unfortunately, it didn't happen. Because should we talk about the movie for the Steven
yeah,
Spielberg
yeah.
Daniel Day
Absolutely,
Lewis movie? Because
absolutely. Mhm.
Lincoln was a great raconteur, right? I mean, he was just a great storyteller. And
The George
Spielberg and
Washington one. Yeah.
yeah, that's the one I was thinking of. That's what I
Go
was thinking
ahead. Go
of.
ahead.
Spielberg, yeah, thank you. Spielberg and Daniel Day Lewis just dramatized it brilliantly. You remember, at
Hmm.
one point the Secretary of War is like gnawing his fingers about some
Yeah, yeah.
massive battle, and Lincoln telling, "Enough of your stories, Lincoln. I don't want any more of your stories." But but yeah, the George Washington war, when he was quoting Ethan Allen, right? Ethan Allen from the
Yes.
Revolutionary War,
Yes.
the
Hmm.
Green Mountain
Hmm.
Boys. I think
That's
he'd gone
right.
to he'd gone to England, and he was visiting Parliament, and they took him in the bathroom, the men's room. They showed there's a picture of George Washington there. The Brits meant it as mockery. This is what we think of Washington. We put him, in the men's room, and Lincoln's telling the story, and Ethan Allen said, "Well, it's appropriate. There's nothing more likely to make an Englishman shit than the picture of George Washington."
That's great.
Yes.
So
Lincoln tells it with so much flair. He's
yeah,
such a great,
yeah,
homespun, down home kind of storyteller. You can see he's just a real personal magnetism about him. And
yes.
again, I think the tragedy. Well, he was murdered. He was 56. He might have had many
Hmm.
years left to live, but
Hmm.
Reconstruction might have gone much less bitterly had Lincoln lived and been able to
Yeah,
preside over that.
yeah. And the hardships. I mean, what I liked about the film was the family relationships. You know, sadly, his wife Mary was not 100% there by this stage in her life in the film. But his son Robert wants to fight. He
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
mother's like, we have already lost enough sons. I'm not going to
yeah,
have you
yeah.
fight. And so this the humanity of Lincoln. I mean, if there's a man that you think of humanity, eh, nobody that term comes to mind. Humanitarian, like in the good sense, not the Ellsworth
Yeah,
Kelly
and
sense.
humane.
Lincoln is the
Humane,
man.
right? He's
Writes
humane.
the letter to the mother who lost her 5 children in war. That letter that he wrote to her is just, you could see the tears on the paper coming from this man. So much death that he oversaw and wanted to end. That was why he was so somewhat unforgiving to the generals who had the chance to end the war so much earlier and never did. It would have been great if he got Grant, in 1862 to kind of take over. But his humanity is just, that's a big part of our love for Lincoln. Proper admiration for him was that, he absolutely every death, affected him, that was under his, and he didn't want his son to die, but he let the son do. He didn't say you cannot fight. He assigned him to be under Grant, so he had some kind of role. But the conflict there between the parents and what to do with the son. I love how the very early in the film, the two black soldiers there. First of all, they talk about that they're paid less, and Lincoln's doesn't know what to do, but they recite, you know, they recite the Gettysburg Address like they know it well enough that this is everybody in who's fighting in this war knows those words by this point in the film. And of course, Tommy Lee Jones, his
Yeah,
role in the film. Oh man, what a giant, of a different type. I mean,
yeah.
a real absolute
Played
abolitionist.
Thaddeus Stevens, right? Uh,
Yes,
that
yeah,
was
hmm
he was a devout abolitionist, and some of the dialogue, between the two, Lincoln and Stevens, Daniel Day Lewis and Tommy Lee Jones, two great actors, and
yeah,
and it's brilliant. That Stevens
yeah,
wants to, really, really, make the South pay for the
yeah,
hell that they've caused,
yeah,
and Lincoln's understands that, but that's not the way to to unify the country
yeah,
again, and preserve the
yeah.
Union and end slavery, and bring it back to
Transition.
amicable, yeah,
Hmm.
bring it, yeah,
Hmm.
transition into amicable relations between these two parts of America that have been fighting this bloody war. And it shows, yeah, how humane Lincoln is. He understands the moral righteousness, of the hardcore abolitionist side here.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
the ultimate goal was to preserve the Union, and
Yeah,
not to continue to propagate this kind of bitterness between two different parts of our nation.
yeah,
And Lincoln,
yeah,
Lincoln had wisdom. Lincoln had wisdom.
yes, yeah,
There was a definite. There's times
Hmm.
There's times when we need this overwhelming moral fervor, and there's times to compromise. And
I agree.
it takes wisdom to know when, which is
Yeah.
which.
I think in that sense, he echoed Benjamin Franklin, the greatest diplomat in American history.
Right,
I think that's where Lincoln also had that, that right balance of the passion, but on a public stage, it's not practical to enforce that in your face, the way Stevens was,
right.
and events played out. Events played out in Lincoln's life, and if we think of the other giants around him in his era, Andy, we talked about Dead Poet Society a couple of weeks ago. Oh, Captain, my Captain. That's
Yeah, yeah.
Walt Whitman's poem is about Lincoln. That's who
That's
who
right.
that is.
That's
Frederick
right.
Douglass. The relationship between him and Lincoln. Mark Twain. All these giants of the 19th century. What was their view of Lincoln? Like it's this man was just up there, deservedly so. When he was pronounced dead, what did the doctor say? He belongs to the ages now. Like this is this man. There's a reason why February 2nd should be a freaking holiday again for this man, because his legacy, and I'll put it here, this is why we celebrate. Whenever
Right,
I look at a
right.
$5 bill, I look at at the image on it, and my heart beats, in gratitude a bit
Yeah.
more, saying, yeah, this is what a president should stand for. He should be principled and take a stand. The two main things, Andy, which we've covered, preserving the Union and emancipating, ending slavery. I mean, whatever else negatives you say about somebody, those two are so towering that everything else pales in comparison.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Lincoln's a
Hmm.
giant of American history. That's where we started the show today, and I think
Yeah,
we could end it.
yeah,
He
I
is a
agree. Hmm.
towering moral figure in American
Hmm.
history. And anybody who thinks they're fighting racism today by canceling Lincoln or tearing down a Lincoln statue is just plain
No,
wrong. He's
no,
just
yeah,
wrong.
yeah. Hmm. Absolutely, yeah,
Well,
yeah. I think we
well,
end
I
it the way
think
we always end, Andy. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we need to salute the. Oh, I just one last story. A couple of years
Sure.
ago, I was in D.C.
Hmm.
with my daughter Penny, and it was
Yeah.
hot. Oh, it was you would have loved it, Robert. It was like 90 something degrees and humid.
Great.
But,
Yeah.
Penny and I were comfortable, but we had to go to the Lincoln Memorial. We had to go
Yeah.
pay homage
Yes.
to to the man who preserved the Union and ended
Yeah.
slavery. And I think again,
Yeah.
I want to repeat what I said before. Uh, by ending slavery, Lincoln completed the promise of the American Revolution. The
Yeah.
principle of individual rights now
Yeah.
applied not just to whites, but to
Yeah.
all Americans.
That's right.
And
That's right.
so
And the
uh,
memorial, Andy, I've been many times,
it's
and
beautiful.
there
It's
is,
beautiful.
it is just an incredible work of art. And when you go there, you feel something, right? You could
Oh,
ask Penny. I'm
oh
sure
yeah.
she felt something. I am in
Yes,
the
yeah.
presence of greatness. The scale of
Absolutely.
it
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
tells you
that's
that.
absolutely right. That's what I was going to say. The gigantic size of
Hmm.
the statue and the monument
Yeah.
is appropriate for
It's
Lincoln's
worthy. Yep.
moral stature
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
his importance in American history and in world history,
Yeah.
because it
In world
shows
history. Yes.
slavery can be abolished. Now the Brits had already done it. Got to give credit to the British, but Lincoln shows even if it takes a war, slavery can be abolished, and
Yes.
but it still exists all
Hmm.
over the world, in many parts of the world anyway. So that's a lesson
Hmm.
that still needs to
Hmm.
be learned. So I think we
Yes.
can salute the great man Robert,
Conceived in
and
liberty. Yep.
conceived in liberty. Exactly right.
That's
And
right.
I want to thank the great man. Wish you and our
Yes.
viewers and listeners to have a heroic day and lead a more heroic life. And we'll be back next
We'll
week
see you next
on the
week
Hero Show.
on the Hero Show. Bye bye now.